Last stop, Route 0. The overnight dispatcher put me on a city bus route I'd never heard of. A ghost shift, they called it. 4 stops past the end of the line to sweep late drunks and lost kids into downtown. Don't pick up if they get on without paying, the old driver warned. Not after 3:13. And I laughed, because nobody gets on a bus after 3:13, unless they're grateful to sit down, fare or not. He didn't laugh back, just tapped the timetable where a gap the width of a thumbnail sat between 2 printed lines, as if someone had scraped out a stop that used to exist. The first hour was empty streets and traffic lights on sensor cycles, changing for no one, a theater of red and green put on for me and me alone. The second hour served a scatter of riders, night, nurses, kitchen closers, a man holding a saxophone case like a newborn, and they all paid even if the reader flashed fail, nodding thanks with the urgency of people who'd waited too long to get home. At 3:12, the bus smelled faintly of rain, though the weather was dry, and a breeze slithered up the aisle without opening the doors. The air pressure wrong the way it gets before a storm that never arrives. At 3:13 on the dot, the lights at the back flickered to a softer color, as if a theater dimmer had been installed only for the last 6 seats, and a woman in a gray coat sat down without stepping up from the curb. She faced forward, hands flat on her knees as if posed by a photographer, and when I glanced in the mirror, the glass showed her profile without meeting my eyes. "End of line?" she asked, and her voice sounded like 2 voices put together, one younger, one out of breath, as if a memory had learned to speak on the ride in. I pressed the brake lightly to feel the weight shift, and the bus didn't register an extra passenger, the suspension reading the same count as the minute before. "Route 0, she said, and smiled into the reflection without looking at me, like she knew the mirror better than the driver. I told her the bus turned around at King and 5th, and she nodded in a way that meant she'd already been there and needed something after. A stop printed in the gap between lines that shouldn't exist. At the terminal, everyone else got off with the exhausted dignity of folks who refused to hurry after a long shift, and the woman in gray stayed seated as the doors sighed open like an offer she was trained to decline. The cleaning crew pretended not to see her, rolling their bins past with the rigid attention of people who've been told not to look into mirrors with old stories in them. I closed up and pulled forward a few feet, then paused because the route wanted me to idle for 2 minutes before the clock rolled into the new hour. A courtesy to timetables that don't believe in ghosts. "Last stop," I said again, and she turned her head without moving her hands, showing me a face with the ordinary prettiness of someone you've passed 100 times without ever learning a name. "I'm waiting for him," she said, and for a second the reflection in the mirror showed a second head beside hers, a blur like a passenger who hadn't chosen a seat yet. The bus's cabin speaker crackled as if a phone had connected, and a clipped male voice asked, "Is this the right one?" in a tone I recognized without wanting to remember my own last voicemail to someone I'd lost. "I can't run unauthorized," I said, using dispatch language to cover the fact that fear makes people formal, because clarity feels safer than kindness. "Then don't run," she said, and the clock over the windshield froze between 3:13 and 3:14, the colon unblinking like a held breath. Outside, the terminal no longer reflected in the bus's curved windshield. Instead, the glass showed a platform lit by gas lamps and a schedule board painted with hand-lettered routes that no one had served in a century. The fare box beeped as if someone dragged a wrist over the sensor, and the screen read "Pied" in a font my bus didn't use, thicker and serifed like an antique poster. The automated voice announced, "Next stop," but the speaker mangled the street name into a word I don't know, all long vowels and a soft consonant that felt like a place you only visit once. "Route 0, the woman repeated, and the bus pulled forward of its own accord, as if gravity had tilted the road down into a neighborhood laid over the city like a tracing paper map. We rolled through blocks where every shop's glass showed a different season than the sidewalk. Winter in a bakery window, autumn in a shoe store, spring in a barber's mirror where no one aged while the hair fell. At each corner, someone stood in that dim zone by the back seats without stepping up, hands on knees, waiting for a stop I couldn't call because the clock had decided to keep the time it liked best. "I don't know where you're going," I said, which felt honest in a way that embarrassed me, like admitting I'd driven this route for years without ever really seeing it. "Back," she said, and the mirror showed the aisle stretching longer than the bus had room for, a corridor running out of sight past the emergency exit into a version of the city where the streets kept their old names and the people kept their promises. "He missed me," she added, and it sounded like a verdict on a night when someone meant to catch the last bus and didn't, the kind of mistake small enough to live in forever. The fare box beeped again, and the printer spat a transfer slip onto the floor that read "Good until yesterday" in the same thick, wrong font. I put on the hazards and stood. Against every rule that says don't leave the seat, because the pass-through mirror showed a shape rising behind her, hand out, the gesture tender and catastrophic at once. "You can't board after 3:13 without paying," I said, as if enforcing a law could unspool whatever this night wanted from me. The woman's mouth opened, and the air pressure shifted like a door in a house you grew up in opening in another room. The old weight of it, knowing every squeak and seam. "Then take it," she said, offering me her transfer slip, which I didn't touch because it looked new and stained at the same time, sharp edges with fingerprints baked into the paper. The second shape took the slip from the floor, and for a moment the bus registered a change in weight, a subtle settling over the right rear tire that told me the suspension had finally decided someone existed back there. The clock clicked into 3:14 with a relieved blink, and the overhead speakers went dead like someone yanked the cord from a wall. The terminal reappeared outside, fluorescent and ordinary, with the cleaning crew midway through a joke they'd started a minute ago by their watches and a lifetime ago by mine. The woman was gone from the seat, the backlights clicked back to full, and the printer coughed out a fresh transfer with the right font and the right date and a smear of carbon like a rubbed word. I picked it up only because drivers pick up what the bus spits out, and the paper read "Good until 3:13 a.m., which felt like a threat if you read it the way a person reads the line in a story they pretend they don't believe. On the next loop, a man carrying a saxophone case got on and sat in the same seat the woman had used, and when we hit 3:13, he tightened his grip without looking up, as if a draft always blew through that row at that minute. The mirror showed nothing special, only me, only the aisle, only the useless truth that a clock can be on time and still be wrong about what happens when the colon blinks and a day decides it won't move forward without collecting its fare. I wrote up my night as routine, turned in the keys, and told the old driver he was right, which made him nod the way people nod when they've already decided which stories to tell the rookies and which to leave as a gap between lines they can tap in warning when the hour's late. My courier app started offering a new bonus zone in the business district after midnight, a double pay flag that kept appearing between two towers that allegedly never finished their 13th floors. The map pins sat between them like a dead pixel, and every time I tried to zoom, the satellite image glitched into a smear of lights before snapping back to normal. The instructions on the first order said deliver to 13B, leave at door, no selfies, no call. Which made me laugh, because the elevators in both buildings jumped from 12 to 14, like the number had been surgically removed. The night concierge didn't look up from the ledger when I asked about 13B, just slid me a visitor badge that read 13B in blocky label maker letters, and waved me to the far elevator with a key that turned the floor dial black between 1, 2, and 14. The car vibrated as if crossing an unpaved road, and the LED floor counter displayed a dash, then a faint 13 like a burn-in under fresh glass. I told myself I was just tired, but the doors opened onto a hallway lined with old security mirrors, where my reflection lagged a half-second behind me like it needed to buffer. The carpet had no pattern, only a thin tread mark running down the center that looked like it had been walked by exactly one pair of shoes for a very long time. There were no exit signs, no art, no buzzing lights, only a dull hum in the walls like a locked server room cooling itself down after a panic. My map said the unit was 13B1000, 307, and the first door I passed was numbered 1307 13B. The digits mirrored as if the hallway were unsure which way to read. I used my knuckle to tap the door, then remembered the instructions and placed the brown bag on the floor, angling it so the camera could see the logo on the receipt for proof. The app wanted a photo, but the circle that usually shows a tiny preview stayed gray no matter how steady I held the frame, like the hallway refused to be captured at 12:19 a.m. After 30 seconds, the preview jolted alive, with a perfect picture of the bag in a hallway that wasn't mine, the carpet patterned, the mirrors actually paintings, and my arm missing from the frame. That's when the door opened to a chain length, and a voice said, "You're late," with no breath behind it, like the words were played from a phone through a cheap speaker. I handed the bag through the small gap and felt a second hand slide over mine, cool, a little damp, and the chain rattled with a polite patience that made me more nervous than if someone had yanked. "No receipt, please," the voice said, and the door closed without footsteps, without a shadow crossing the seam under the threshold. In the elevator, my badge felt heavier, and when the doors shut, the mirror in the back showed me alone, except for a wet handprint on the brushed steel at shoulder height that matched the shape I hadn't seen on the door. The LED cycled 12, 11, 10, then glitched upward, 14, 15, 16, as if the car refused to pass through the number it had just used. I pressed the lobby button until my thumb went numb, and the car decided to obey after a long pause where the floor counter became a flat line. The concierge had left his chair, his ledger open to a blank page, where the timestamps should have been a neat ladder of ink. A janitor buffed a clean floor that didn't need it, smiling in the unfocused way of people who look at your shoulder to pretend they're meeting your eyes. "Badge," he said, and when I handed it over, he snapped the label off like a scab and slid the plastic into a drawer full of identical badges with the same brittle, blacked-out numerals. Back in the car, the app paid me double, plus a patience bonus, which I had never seen, and the tip came with a note. "Thank you for coming back." I told myself it was night shift humor, and took a second order to the same zone because every rule I've learned about being broke says to follow the money, even if your instincts tell you to go home. The instructions matched, the unit flipped, the time 1 minute later, as if the building were running a script and I just reloaded the same level. On the second delivery, the hallway smelled faintly of ironed fabric, hot and flat, the way an old suit jacket smells when a steamer wakes it up. My reflection in the first convex mirror wasn't a half second behind it, was in front of me, walking just ahead, like I was chasing myself and losing. The door opened before I could knock, the chain knot set, the inside dim like a hotel room that hadn't been assigned in a while, and a glass of water on a coaster half drunk, as if the previous me had taken a break. "Please set it inside," the voice said, and this time it sounded closer to my own voice than the one that greeted me earlier, an echo shaped like familiarity rather than static. On the dresser, a stack of printed delivery photos from the app showed bags arranged in the same spot I was now standing, each photo slightly misted by a blur at the edges, as if the camera lens were fogging from breath. I placed the bag, took the picture, and watched as the preview again showed a different hallway with patterned carpet and framed art of ships at sea, and no me in the shot. What happens if I don't come back? I asked, partly to the empty room, partly to the chain that had allowed me in without comment. "We keep the badge," the voice said from behind the bathroom door, and water ran as if someone were washing hands that didn't dry. "And you keep the route," it added, with a politeness that made me think of contracts more than threats. I backed out, pulling the door gently shut, and when I turned down the hallway, the single tread mark now led directly to the elevator, fresh at the edges like a new pass in wet paint. Inside the car, the mirror no longer showed me alone. It showed the hallway door slowly opening a crack on 13B, as if the elevator had grown another eye and left it pointed backward. The LED flickered 13, clear and strong, not a burn-in, and my badge warmed in my palm now that it had a number to match. I didn't take a third order, but the app kept offering me patience bonuses for the rest of the week, the pin always sitting between those glass towers like a moth that refused to move off a windshield. Each night, I watched the offers get more generous as the time slid closer to midnight, and each night the thought in my head sounded a little less like mine when it said, "One more trip won't hurt." On Friday, I logged out for good and slept through noon, and woke to find a visitor badge on my kitchen counter, the label peeled clean, the plastic cool to the touch like it had just left a basement drawer. The next morning, my apartment elevator skipped from 12 to 14 as usual, but for the first time in years, the numbers rested a heartbeat on 13. Like a tongue testing a tooth. I told myself that was how elevators settle after maintenance. And when I checked the lobby camera on my phone out of habit, the feed showed me walking in at 12:19 a.m., carrying a brown bag. I didn't order. The frame paused, as if someone pressed a finger to the glass, and a wet handprint bloomed at shoulder height on the metal panel just behind me where no one stood at all. The borrowed mirror the storage unit auction was a bust, until the metal roll-up door of number 23 rattled open to a stack of furniture, draped in yellowed sheets and a wooden standing mirror whose glass had gone the color of smoked. T. The lot sheet described antiques, but listed no brands, and the only note taped to the inside wall said, "Do not remove mirror without replacing," in block letters that looked like someone had written them while the building trembled. The crowd leaned in and leaned back at the same time, superstitious and greedy in equal measure, which is the natural posture of anyone who's watched too many auctions end with trash and one with treasure. I won the unit cheap because the good bidders wanted sealed electronics, and this was all dust and wood and the kind of mirror your grandmother tells you not to stare into at night if you've been crying. The manager cut the lock, signed the receipt, and told me I had until closing to clear the space, or at least to close it back up with a new combination. His voice flat in the way of night employees who've learned to keep their stories generic. The mirror rolled on little brass casters that squealed like mice, and when I tipped it to catch the light, my reflection went a half shade darker, as if the glass had a tint that didn't match the room. I told myself the waviness was just old glass imperfections that make your eyes think about water when they should think about wood, because stories about mirrors only get good when someone decides a flaw is a door. The backboard had a chalk mark, a faint 23 circled twice, and a pair of nail holes where something had once hung, the ghost of a hook in raw wood. I left the mirror in the unit until I could borrow a van, closed the door, and walked the hallway past 10 other units that hummed the forgettable electricity of things people don't need but can't let go. That night, my phone recorded a voice note while I slept. 5 minutes of shuffling and a low knock. And I deleted it because I live alone and I prefer facts to dreams. In the morning, the storage app sent a push. Activity at Unit 23. Door accessed. With a timestamp 2 hours after closing under my name, which should have required a code I hadn't set yet. I drove over in daylight, because daylight makes everybody brave, and rolled the door to find the mirror uncovered and angled toward the aisle as if someone had turned it to watch the corridor while my back was turned. My reflection looked normal until I raised my hand to adjust my hair, and the hand in the glass raised a half beat late. A tiny sync error your brain forgives until the part that believes in rhythm refuses to keep clapping along. Behind me in the reflection, a person walked past with a box, only no one passed in the real aisle, and the box she carried had my address on the label in a handwriting I recognized from bills and birthday cards. I didn't turn around, because turning around is how you give a door permission to be a door instead of a painting. So I lifted the mirror onto the dolly and wheeled it out into the sunlight like a fish you don't want to name. At home, I put the mirror in the hallway near the front door, told myself it was temporary, and noticed how the glass absorbed the apartment's color scheme the way a dark lake eats sky. The first night, I passed it carrying laundry and saw a second me step into frame a fraction early like a stage cue, then settle into perfect sync as if embarrassed to be caught. I draped a scarf over the top edge, the way people do when they pretend they aren't superstitious, and went to bed with the door cracked because childhood habits die politely but never leave. At 3:17 the hallway light turned on by itself. My phone recorded a new voice note, and the whisper used my name in a tone that made me think of someone practicing a pronunciation they'd learned from a letter. The recording reappeared after I deleted it, attached to a calendar invite called Return, scheduled for noon at the storage facility, organizer, me. Which is the kind of glitch that makes you feel foolish to fear because offices are built on invites, and we all survive invites every day. I accepted the invite just to stop the buzzing, and the mirror's glass pulsed a little gray wave from top to bottom like a screen refreshing. At the unit, I found a cardboard box where the mirror had stood, taped shut and labeled with my address in that same tidy, familiar hand, a looped 3 that looked like a pair of stacked eyes. The manager said someone had dropped it off with my name and a shrug, as if favors are a currency you can spend without explaining the debt. I opened it at home to find a brass hook, a coil of picture wire, and a folded note that read, "A mirror is a loan from a room you can visit but not keep," which is not a proverb I've heard, but felt old in the way an invented rule feels quickly sacred. I mounted the hook on the backboard, ran the wire, and thought about replacements, the way a museum lends and borrows pieces so that walls don't become jealous. Because jealousy is what stories say breaks glass when no one's in the room. When the mirror hung true, my reflection looked cleaner, less tea-stained, as if the glass appreciated manners. An anthropomorphism I allowed. Because courtesy is a superstition that keeps people from touching exhibits, and maybe keeps exhibits from touching back. That night, I set my phone camera to watch the hallway, not because I wanted proof, but because proof is a soft word you can sleep near even when the house learns new noises. At 2:59, the mirror showed the storage corridor behind me instead of my apartment. A neat row of roll-up doors painted the color of aspirin, and a single figure paused as if deciding which box belonged to her in this version of the place. She lifted her hand in a polite wave, and it was my hand, my watch, my long-heeled scar over the knuckle from a winter years ago, and I understood the note like a set of instructions your grandmother would approve. At 3:17, the mirror surfaced my hallway again, and the apartment exhaled like a lung, returning to a familiar breath. the air pressure snapping back into place after a door closes. I returned the mirror the next morning as if obeying a library due date, which made the manager smile a tired smile because paperwork loves people who behave. I hung a cheap department store mirror in the hall, its glass too perfect to be trusted, and felt unobserved in a way that wasn't relief so much as loneliness. The storage app pinged with "Activity at Unit 23, door accessed," and I muted notifications, a small betrayal of curiosity that tasted like metal in the mouth. Weeks later, a friend asked to borrow something haunted for a themed shoot, the way people ask for spice they won't finish, and I found myself at the facility again without admitting to myself I'd chosen the route days ago. The roll-up door clattered, and inside stood the mirror I'd returned. The backboard, now clean wood without the chalk 23. The hook centered, the wire taut like a plucked string. A note lay on the floor, block letters in a hand. I might have learned if I'd ever learned to write like an ant instead of a person who types, and it read, "Replace what you borrow, or the room you visit will visit you," which is either a threat or a receipt, depending on who is reading. I took the mirror because stories about mirrors only end two ways, and the kindest of them involves etiquette, which costs less than fear if you pay on time. At home, I leaned it against the wall and waited for the sync error, the late hand, the second me who cares about rules, and none of it happened because I'd hung the cheaper mirror on the opposite wall, and rooms understand symmetry better than we do. I texted my friend that the prop was ready, set a calendar invite for noon, and watched the glass breathe a soft gray wave from top to bottom, polite as a curtain before a show begins and as final as one dropping for the night. Most people don't know that there's a specific stretch of Route 23 between Columbus and Cincinnati where things happen. Not accidents, not weather-related incidents, things that don't have explanations. I'm going to tell you about Marcus, a truck driver who learned this the hard way. Marcus had been driving long haul for 17 years. He knew every highway in the Midwest like the back of his hand a euro. The safe routes, the dangerous stretches, the truck stops with decent coffee. Route 23 was his regular run, 3 times a week, usually at night when traffic was minimal. He preferred it that way. Less chaos, better time. That was his mantra: get in, get out, get paid. On a cold November evening, around midnight, Marcus was making his usual run. The weather was clear, the road was empty, and his playlist was blaring country music through his truck's speakers. He'd made this drive probably 1,000 times. He wasn't thinking about anything in particular euro, just counting down the miles until his next break at the Pine Ridge truck stop. That's when he saw her. She was standing on the shoulder of the road, illuminated by his headlights, like a ghost emerging from the darkness. She wore a white dress, 1952nd style, completely out of place on a modern highway at 1:30 inches the morning. More unsettling was that there was nothing around her for miles a euro. No broken down car, no houses, nothing that explained why she would be there. Marcus should have kept driving. His instincts screamed at him to do exactly that. But he was a decent man, a father of 2, and the thought of leaving someone stranded in the cold didn't sit right with him. He slowed his truck and pulled onto the shoulder about 20 yards past her. When he turned around in his cabin to look through the rear window, she was already at his door. She'd moved impossibly fast. He could see her clearly now in the cab's interior light a euro. Young, maybe early 20s, with dark hair and pale skin. Her dress was pristine, not a wrinkle, not a speck of dirt. She smiled at him, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who knew something he didn't. "Thank you for stopping," she said when he cracked open the door. Her voice was soft, almost melodic, but there was something wrong about it. It sounded like it was coming through water, distorted somehow. "Are you okay? Is your car broken down?" Marcus asked, keeping the door mostly closed. "I need to get to Cincinnati," she said, completely ignoring his question. "Will you take me?" Marcus hesitated. Every warning light in his brain was flashing. This was exactly the kind of situation that ended badly. But she was just standing there, looking lost and cold, and he couldn't bring himself to refuse. "Yeah, okay, get in." She climbed into the passenger seat without another word, and Marcus continued down Route 23. He tried to make conversation a few times, but she only stared straight ahead at the road. She never blinked. Not once in 20 minutes. Marcus began to notice other things too, euro. The temperature in the cab had dropped significantly, despite the heater running at full blast. His breath was visible now. Frost was forming on the windows from the inside. "You're not from around here, are you?" Marcus tried, desperate to break the unsettling silence. "I'm from here," she said quietly. "I've always been from here. What's your name?" She turned to look at him, and Marcus felt his stomach drop. Her eyes were completely black a euro, not dark brown, not shadowed, completely, impossibly black, like two voids in her skull. "My name is Margaret," she said. "I died on this road in 1957. A man picked me up, just like you did. He drove me to Cincinnati, just like you're going to. But halfway there, he got tired of me. He pulled into a rest area, and she trailed off, still staring at him with those empty eyes. He was never the same after. None of them were." Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel. His heart was hammering in his chest. He wanted to pull over, wanted to throw her out of his truck, wanted to wake up and realize this was all a nightmare. But his body wasn't responding correctly. He felt paralyzed. I don't believe in ghosts," Marcus whispered. "That's good," Margaret said, turning back to face the road. "Because I'm not a ghost. I'm something that's been waiting on this road for a very long time, and I'm very grateful you stopped." They drove in silence for another hour. Marcus's mind was racing, but his body felt sluggish, as if moving through water. He had no control over his hands a euro. They stayed on the wheel, his foot stayed on the gas. It was as if something else was driving now, and he was just a passenger in his own body. When they passed the Cincinnati exit, Margaret spoke again. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said. "You stopped. You helped. That's more than the others ever did. I'm going to give you a gift instead." Marcus felt something cold press into his palm. He looked down to see a golden locket in his hand. It was ornate, beautiful, and absolutely freezing to the touch. When he opened it, he saw a photograph inside a euro. A young woman in a 1,950 seconds dress smiling at the camera. It was Margaret, looking exactly as she did now, except her eyes in the photo were normal. "That's so you'll remember," Margaret said. "So you'll know this was real, and so you'll warn others. Tell them not to stop on Route 23 at night. Tell them I'm still here, and I'm still collecting rides." When Marcus looked to his right, the passenger seat was empty. The cold vanished instantly, and warmth flooded back into the cab. The locket was still in his hand. Marcus drove the rest of the way to Cincinnati in shock. He never told anyone what happened to Euro. Who would believe him? But he kept the locket. And he never drove Route 23 at night again. 3 months later, another truck driver reported picking up a woman in a white dress on Route 23. He said he drove her to Cincinnati, but when he looked over at a red light, she was gone. He found a golden locket on the passenger seat. He never drove that road again either. The lockets keep appearing. Truck drivers keep finding them. And every single person who's found one has stopped driving Route 23 at night. But new drivers, who don't know the stories, they keep picking her up, and she's still collecting her rides, still waiting for someone to listen to her story. Because Margaret was never interested in revenge. She was just tired of being alone. If you're looking for an apartment in the city on a budget, you learn not to ask too many questions. You look at the numbers, you look at the location, and you make a decision. James didn't have the luxury of being picky. His divorce had left him broke, and his new job barely paid enough for a studio. So when he found the apartment on 47th Street listed at half the market price, he didn't investigate too deeply. He just signed the lease. The building was old, pre-war construction, the kind that was probably beautiful once but had been allowed to decay over decades. His apartment was on the 4th floor, a one-bedroom with hardwood floors and high ceilings. The first night, James barely noticed the cold spot in the corner of the bedroom. He was too exhausted. The second night, he couldn't ignore it. The cold started at the foot of his bed around midnight. Not a drop to euro, James checked the windows and doors thoroughly. It was a localized cold, intensifying as the night went on, until the entire corner of his bedroom felt like a walk-in freezer. By 3 a.m., his breath was visible and frost was forming on the windows near that corner. By morning, it was gone. James called his landlord, a perpetually unamused man named Victor. "The heating's probably just uneven in the old building," Victor said with a shrug. "You get used to it." But Victor wouldn't look him in the eye when he said it. That was the first sign that something was wrong. Over the next week, other things started happening. James would come home and find his apartment had been rearranged not dramatically, but small things. The couch cushions would be in different positions. His books would be reorganized on the shelf. His kitchen cabinet would be open. Each time, James wondered if he was going crazy, until the night he came home to find every single light in his apartment turned on, despite the fact that he'd left them all off that morning. He was starting to realize that Victor had deliberately rented him this apartment cheaply. He'd gotten rid of other tenants by not telling them about whatever was happening here. The research came next. James spent hours at the public library, going through old newspapers on microfiche. It took him 3 days of searching, but he finally found what he was looking for. In 1983, a woman named Claire Morrison had been found dead in that apartment. The article was brief, unclear about the cause of death. It just said she'd been discovered by her downstairs neighbor who reported a smell. The police report was vague. No criminal charges were filed. The case went cold. James tried to find more information, but the trail was old and cold. He did find one more mention, a small article from 1984 about another tenant in the same building who'd moved out due to personal circumstances. Then another in 1987, and another in 1992. Always the same building, sometimes the same apartment. That's when James understood. Whatever was in his apartment, it had been there for over 40 years. It had driven out countless tenants. And Victor, for whatever reason, kept letting apartments to people who didn't know any better. The final night came about 2 weeks after James moved in. He woke up at 3 a.m. to find his apartment wasn't cold. It was warm. Too warm. Oppressively warm. Like the air had been baked in an oven. His sheets were soaked with sweat, and standing at the foot of his bed was a woman. She was translucent, barely visible, but James could make out her features. She looked sad, desperately sad, like someone who'd been crying for 40 years without stopping. She wore a nightgown from another era, and there was something wrong with her wrist-saw euro. They were bruised, marked with deep indentations, as if she'd worn tight restraints. "Why are you here?" James whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'm not leaving," she replied, her voice like wind through an empty room. "He said I could never leave. He said if I tried to tell anyone, he'd find me and hurt me worse. So, I've stayed. And I'll always stay. And anyone who comes here has to hear me. Has to know." "Know what?" James asked, though he thought he already knew the answer. "My name was Claire Morrison. I came to this city to start a new life. I met a man who seemed nice. He seemed kind. He rented me this apartment. And one night he came to see me, and he wouldn't leave. He said I owed him money. I said I'd pay next week. He said that wasn't good enough. He said." Her voice broke. "He said I'd have to work for him. And when I refused, when I tried to fight, he tied me to this bed. He left me here for 3 days. And She faded, becoming more translucent, until she was barely a shadow. But her voice continued, stronger now, more desperate. "No one came. No one helped. The landlord knew. People heard me. And no one came. I died here. And I can't leave because I'm still waiting for someone to come. I'm still hoping someone will help me. But they never do. They just leave, like you will. Everyone leaves." James didn't remember getting out of bed. He didn't remember running from the apartment or driving to the police station. But somehow, at 4 a.m., he was sitting in a precinct in Queens, telling a tired desk sergeant about a haunting on 47th Street. The police took a report. They went to the apartment. They found nothing unusual. The detective assigned to James's case, a woman named Rodriguez, was sympathetic but skeptical. She ran a records check and found Claire Morrison's case file, but it was sealed. Whatever had happened, the city wasn't talking. James got his security deposit back €1. Victor didn't even argue €1 and never looked back. But before he left, Rodriguez gave him something. She slipped him a photocopy of a name and an address. "That's the guy who killed her," she whispered. "Everyone knew it, but the case was sealed for reasons I don't understand. I'm not supposed to tell you, but it's wrong that you don't know." The man's name was Marcus Hendricks. He'd been a building superintendent back then. He died in 1997, struck by a car in what was officially ruled an accident. Rodriguez thought James should know €1, thought everyone should know, but the apartment on 47th Street is still there. Victor still owns the building, and he still rents out that apartment to people who don't know any better. Every few months, there's a new tenant. Every few months, they move out in the middle of the night, too terrified to stay. And in that apartment, in that dark corner of that building, Claire is still waiting for someone to finally help her. Still hoping that one day, someone will do more than run away. That someone, finally, will be brave enough to stay. There's a phenomenon that police departments across North America know about, but don't really talk about. It's called the inside call, or sometimes the repeat caller. The details vary, but the pattern is always the same. Someone calls 911, claiming to be trapped in a location. Sometimes giving an address, sometimes not. The call is traced. Police are dispatched. They arrive at the location and find nothing. No signs of forced entry, no signs of struggle, no signs that anyone besides the homeowner has been there in months. Then the calls keep coming. This happened to Sarah Chen for 3 weeks straight. It started on a Tuesday night when her phone rang at 1:01 p.m. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Hello? Hello? Can you hear me? A woman's voice, panicked, terrified. Please call the police. Someone has me locked in here. They brought me to a house, I don't know where, but I can see a street sign. It says Maple Drive, and they said they're going to hurt me. Please, you have to help me. What? Wait, slow down. Have you called 911? Sarah asked, bewildered. I can't. My phone won't work properly, but I can call out to random numbers through this old phone in the basement. I don't know how, but please, you have to send help. Sarah called 911 immediately and reported the call. She gave them the details of Euro Maple Drive, a woman in a basement, urgent. The police said they'd look into it. They called her back an hour later to say they'd checked all the houses on Maple Drive and found nothing unusual. The dispatcher thought it might have been a prank call or someone with a mental health crisis who had dialed numbers randomly. Sarah tried to forget about it. She went to bed. But around 2 a.m., her phone rang again. Same unknown number. The same woman. Still panicked. Why hasn't anyone come? Why haven't they found me? Please, I'm running out of time. I can hear him coming back. I can hear the door. Who is doing this? Who has you? Sarah demanded. I don't know. I was at the mall and I parked my car and someone just put something over my face and I woke up here and the line went dead. Sarah immediately called 911 again. This time, the dispatcher was less sympathetic. Ma'am, we've already checked. There's no one on Maple Drive who's reported a kidnapping. This sounds like a hoax. It's not a hoax, Sarah insisted. Someone is really in danger, but they wouldn't send anyone. They'd already wasted resources on the first call. The calls continued. 3 times that first night. Twice the next day, the woman a Euro, who identified herself as Lisa a Euro, was always terrified, always insisting her captor was coming back, always giving cryptic details about her location. She mentioned a blue house with white shutters. She mentioned hearing trains in the distance. She mentioned a basement with a small window that showed shoes walking past at street level. Sarah became obsessed. She started mapping out areas near Maple Drive that had trains, looking for blue houses, trying to pinpoint exactly where this woman might be. She called 911 repeatedly. Each time, the police would either refuse to come or would go through the motions and find nothing. On day 5, a detective named Marcus Warren finally came to Sarah's house. He seemed tired and frustrated, like he'd been assigned the crazy lady case as punishment. Miss Chen, we've done extensive searching. We've checked not just Maple Drive, but every location she's mentioned. There's no sign of any kidnapping. No missing persons reports match her description. No vehicles abandoned anywhere. We've even checked the old train tunnels. So what am I supposed to do? Sarah asked desperately. Just ignore her calls? She's clearly in danger. Here's what I think, Warren said, pulling out a tablet to show her some data. The calls are coming from a VoIP service, a free online calling service. Someone could be using it from anywhere. It's probably someone with a mental illness who's latched onto your number, or it could be someone messing with you. Either way, there's no actual person in physical danger. But Sarah knew he was wrong. She could hear the genuine terror in Lisa's voice. This wasn't someone who was mentally ill a Euro. This was someone truly experiencing horror, truly experiencing danger. On day 8, Lisa's calls became stranger. Instead of asking for help, she started saying things like, I'm so tired of being here. I'm so tired of this. Can I come home? I just want to go home. And then, wait, how did you get my number? How do you keep calling me? Sarah realized with a chill that Lisa thought she was the one making the calls. Lisa thought Sarah had kidnapped her and was calling her to torment her. No, Sarah tried to explain. You've been calling me. You've been trying to get me to help you. There was a long silence on the line. Then Lisa's voice, small and confused. But I don't have a phone. I don't have anything here. How am I talking to you? That's when Sarah realized the truth. She didn't know how to explain it, but she knew. She wasn't receiving calls from Lisa. She was making calls to Lisa. Somehow, every time her phone rang with this unknown number, Sarah was dialing into a basement somewhere, forcing the voice of a terrified woman into her ear. And every time Sarah answered, every time Sarah engaged with Lisa's story, Sarah was becoming the one doing the calling. The calls stopped after that, but Sarah got a phone bill the next month showing hundreds of calls to a number that didn't exist. Each call was hours-long €, hours that Sarah didn't remember making, conversations she didn't recall having. Her phone company couldn't explain it. The number wasn't real, but the bills were undeniably real. She changed her phone number, but 3 weeks later, the same calls started again, this time from another unknown number, and Lisa's voice was still there, still terrified, but now asking, "Are you the one keeping me here? Have you been keeping me here the whole time?" When Sarah tried to trace the calls herself, she made a discovery that shattered her. She looked up the address on Maple Drive that Lisa had first mentioned. The blue house with white shutters. She drove there. It was real. And when she looked at the old records for that house, she found a newspaper article from 1987. A woman named Lisa Hartman had been kidnapped from a shopping mall. She'd been found 3 days later in the basement of a blue house on Maple Drive. She'd been severely traumatized, and her captor had never been caught. Lisa Hartman had recovered physically, but had spent the rest of her life in psychiatric care, claiming she kept hearing voices, kept receiving phantom phone calls from her kidnapper. She'd committed suicide in 2001. Sarah realized then what was happening. She wasn't receiving calls from another dimension or a ghost. She was participating in something worse. She was creating a loop, a psychic connection to a trauma that had marked the area, that had burned itself into the location like a scar tissue. And by answering the call, by engaging with Lisa's terror, Sarah was becoming the instrument of that terror. She was becoming the voice that Lisa heard. Sarah moved houses. She changed her number again. She tried everything she could think of, but sometimes, late at night, when she's alone, her phone still rings. Unknown number. And Sarah doesn't answer. She can't answer, because she knows that if she does, if she engages one more time, the loop will become permanent. Lisa won't just be calling her. Sarah will become trapped on the other end of the line, and someone else will pick up one day, confused and terrified, wondering who the desperate woman begging for help really is. The calls still come, about once every few months. Sarah has learned to ignore them, but she sometimes wonders about the people who do answer. Who, right now, in their own homes, is hearing Lisa's voice? Who thinks they're receiving a call from a kidnapping victim, not realizing they're actually calling into one? And how long until they realize the truth? How long until they become part of the loop? Because that's the real horror. It's not that Lisa is still suffering. It's that her suffering has become a weapon, a trap that catches anyone empathetic enough to care. And once you care, once you engage, it's almost impossible to stop. In a small town in Vermont called Riverside, there's a photograph hanging in the Historical Society Museum that no one is quite sure how to explain. It's been there for over 50 years, and the curator has asked multiple times whether it should remain on display. But the museum board always votes to keep it, because the photograph tells a story that the town has tried to forget a story that's impossible to ignore once you've seen the image. The photograph was taken in 1957 by a photographer named Henry Wallace, who was documenting life in Riverside for a national magazine series on small-town America. Henry was a professional, acclaimed in his field, known for capturing genuine moments of American life. His work was powerful and honest, but one photograph from his Riverside collection stood out as profoundly strange. The photograph shows a town picnic in Riverside Park. It's a beautiful summer day, tables laden with food, families gathered in clusters, children playing. Henry captured it during a peak moment when everyone was relaxed and happy. There are approximately 80 people visible in the photograph, all posed naturally, laughing or engaged in conversation. The image is perfect in every way, a quintessential American summer scene, except for one detail. If you look carefully at the background, half hidden behind a large oak tree, there's a figure that shouldn't be there. It appears to be a man, tall and impossibly thin, wearing clothing that seems anachronistic for 1957. He's wearing what looks like clothing from at least 50 years earlier Euro, the 1900s perhaps. His face is turned directly toward the camera, and his expression is blank, utterly devoid of emotion. But the most disturbing detail is his eyes. They're entirely black, not just the pupils, but the entire eye socket. Just absolute darkness where his eyes should be. When Henry first showed the photograph to the newspaper editor, the editor immediately suggested it was a photographic error or a shadow that coincidentally resembled a human figure. Henry was certain it wasn't. He remembered taking the shot, and while he hadn't consciously noticed the figure at the time of Euro, the focus was on the family groups of Euro. Something about the image seemed wrong when he developed it in the darkroom. Henry had an enlargement made, focusing on the figure behind the tree. In the enlargement, there was no question. It was a person, and that person was staring directly at the camera with those impossible black eyes. Henry decided to investigate. He visited the Historical Society and pulled the picnic guest list from that Dia Euro, a list that had been compiled by the town council for documentation purposes. There were 78 names on the list. Henry looked at the photograph again and counted the people. 80. 2 extra people had appeared in the photograph who weren't on the guest list. One was an older woman on the far left high Euro when Henry interviewed people at the museum. No one could identify her. The other was the figure behind the tree. Henry became obsessed. He interviewed townspeople who attended the picnic, showing them the photograph and asking if they recognized the figure. People became uncomfortable. One man, Richard Carlisle, who lived in Riverside his entire life, took one look at the photograph, turned very pale, and told Henry to stop asking questions. When Henry pressed him, Richard left and didn't return his calls. Henry eventually dropped the matter and moved on to other assignments. The photograph was published in the National magazine as part of his series, though it generated unusually few comments. Most readers seemed to miss the strange detail in the background, or they assumed it was a trick of light and shadow. Years passed. Henry died in 1985. His archives were donated to various institutions and museums. The Riverside Historical Society acquired several of his photographs from his Riverside collection, including the picnic photograph. It was hung in the museum in 1975 and has remained there ever since. But something odd began to happen in Riverside around 1980. People started reporting strange occurrences, encounters with a tall, impossibly thin figure wearing outdated clothing. He would appear in peripheral vision, standing perfectly still, watching. When people turned to look directly at him, he'd vanish. But everyone who reported seeing him mentioned the same thing: his eyes, or the absence of them a Euro. Just solid blackness where eyes should be. Old people who'd attended the picnic in 1957 started mentioning it to their children and grandchildren. They began to theorize that something was captured in Henry's photograph, and that the act of photographing Ita Euro, fixing its image on Filma Euro, had done something. One elderly woman, Margaret Thompson, was interviewed by a local reporter in 1982. She said that she remembered the day of the picnic vividly, and she also remembered having a strange sense of being watched. She said that after the photograph was published and she saw it, she started experiencing nightmares. In the nightmares, the figure behind the tree would turn fully toward her, and those black eyes would grow larger and larger until she woke up screaming. Margaret claimed that the nightmares started affecting her health. She became frail and anxious. She began drinking heavily. She was hospitalized multiple times for psychological evaluations. In 1985, Margaret walked into the woods behind her home and was found 3 days later, severely dehydrated and incoherent. She kept muttering about the eyes from the tree. Margaret lived for another 5 years, but never fully recovered mentally. More cases accumulated. People who'd attended the picnic or whose relatives had attended reported increased anxiety, nightmares, and inexplicable episodes of feeling watched. Some experienced deterioration in their health and mental state. Others reported seeing the figure Euro, the same tall, thin figure with the black eyes a Euro, appearing randomly in Riverside, always watching, never approaching. In 1990, a researcher named Dr. Elizabeth Hartman became interested in the phenomenon. She traveled to Riverside to study the case, interviewing descendants of picnic attendees and examining the photograph in detail. She brought in colleagues to analyze the photograph using enhanced imaging technology. Their conclusion was striking. The figure behind the tree showed no sign of photographic manipulation or tampering. The image was genuine, created at the moment the photograph was taken in 1957. Dr. Hartman proposed a theory. Whatever was captured in the photograph existed in that moment, and somehow its image euro, its essence, perpopsa euro, was transferred to the photograph. She suggested that people who viewed the photograph were somehow being exposed to something that existed outside normal perception, but her colleagues dismissed the theory as pseudoscience. What was undeniable, however, was the cluster of health and psychological issues among people connected to the photograph, particularly those who'd attended the picnic. Local health officials conducted a study and found a statistically significant correlation between attendance at the 1957 picnic and subsequent health complications, mental health issues, and early death. By 2000, fewer than 20 people were still alive who had attended the original picnic. Of those 20, 14 had experienced significant psychological or health problems in their later years. 3 had disappeared under mysterious circumstances, including the man who told Henry to stop investigating. The last surviving attendee, James Morrison, gave an interview to the Riverside Record in 2005, just before his death. He said something that unsettled everyone who read it. "I saw that thing at the picnic, not with my eyes euro, not at first, but I saw it. I felt it watching us all. And when Henry took the photograph, I knew something terrible had happened. Because now it was trapped. Trapped, but not imprisoned. Every time someone looks at that photograph, they let it out a little more. Every year, more people see it, and it gets stronger. It's not haunting us because we took the photograph. It's haunting us because we made it real. We put it on film. We preserved it. We gave it permanence." James died a week after giving that interview. The official cause was a heart attack, but his family said he'd been declining rapidly ever since the interview, as if the act of speaking about the photograph had weakened him. The photograph remains in the Riverside Historical Society Museum, displayed in a small room dedicated to Henry Wallace's work. A placard explains the photograph's history and some of the documented anomalies. But museum staff report that visitors tend to avoid prolonged viewing of the image. Security footage shows that people often approach the photograph, look at it briefly, then quickly move on to other exhibits. A few visitors report feeling watched while standing in front of it. More disturbing are the recent reports from people who claim they can feel the figure's eyes on them, even when they're not physically present at the museum. Some people who've seen reproductions of the photograph online claim to have experienced the same sensation. The image has circulated through paranormal communities online, and there's now an extensive forum dedicated to discussing encounters with the figure euro, the picnic phantom, as some have named it. People report that if you look at the photograph long enough, you might notice something that wasn't visible before. The figure is slowly moving. Frame-by-frame analysis of digital photographs taken decades apart shows subtle shifts in position. The figure behind the tree appears to be edging closer to the camera with each passing year. Some people have calculated that at the current rate, the figure will be clearly visible in the foreground of the image within the next 20 years. The museum board has debated removing the photograph multiple times, but there's a persistent worry that to remove it would be like opening a door. Some researchers believe the photograph serves as a containment euro that, as long as it remains fixed and documented, the entity is bound to the image. Remove it, and something might be released. The town of Riverside has largely tried to forget about the photograph and the legend surrounding it, but it's become impossible to ignore. Whenever a visitor comes to the museum and sees the image, they leave changed. They report nightmares, a sense of being watched, and an inexplicable dread. Some leave Riverside quickly, unsettled by a presence they can't quite articulate. The last official statement from the Historical Society, given in 2019, was this: "We maintain this photograph as a historical document. We neither confirm nor deny the circumstances or phenomena surrounding it. We only ask that visitors approach it with respect and awareness that some mysteries may not have rational explanations." To this day, if you visit the Riverside Historical Society and you look at that 1957 picnic photograph closely really closely you might notice something in the background that makes your skin crawl. And if you're unfortunate enough to have one of those moments where you swear the figure is looking directly at you, staring with those empty black eyes, locals will tell you not to worry. They'll tell you the figure is still trapped behind the tree, for now, but they'll also warn you, don't look too long, because every person who truly sees it becomes connected to it. And the longer you look, the more it notices you in return. Because somewhere, in some dimension between the photograph and reality, that figure is waiting. It's always watching. And it's slowly making its way forward, one year at a time, getting closer to the edge of the Frama Euro and closer to stepping out of it entirely.
Keep your doors locked. Did you choose a knife?
There's a suburban neighborhood in Columbus, Ohio, where something unsettling happens every year on the same night. This is the story of what residents call the Midnight Visitor, a Euro and urban legend that started as a whispered warning, but became something far more terrifying when people realized it was real. It all began in 2008 when a man named Robert Chen moved into a quiet cul-de-sac with his family. He was a software engineer, worked long hours, and wasn't particularly social. His neighbors barely knew him. What they didn't know was that Robert had a peculiar habitat Euro. He kept meticulous records of everything, including every single night he experienced something paranormal in his home. According to Robert's journal, which was later found by investigators, it started on October 23rd. He woke at exactly 3:47 a.m. to the sound of his front door opening. Robert lived alone at the time of Euro. His family was visiting relatives in California. He described in his notes that he heard footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate. But here's the thing. When he worked up the courage to check, he found his front door unlocked, yet no one was inside. For the next 3 nights, the same thing happened. The door would open, he'd hear footsteps, but no intruder. By the 4th night, Robert decided to stay awake. He positioned himself on his living room couch facing the front door and waited. According to his journal entry, at 3:47 a.m. sharp, his front door slowly creaked open. Robert could see a silhouette in the doorway Euro, tall, impossibly thin, wearing what appeared to be a dark coat. But the moment he turned on the lights, there was nothing. The door was closed, locked from the inside. Robert became obsessed. He installed security cameras. He set up motion sensors. He left his lights on, kept his doors triple locked, and documented everything. For weeks, nothing happened. Then October 23rd came around, again a Euro. Exactly 1 year later, the visitor returned. This time, Robert captured something on his security camera. A blurred figure standing in his hallway at 3:47 a.m. The footage was distorted, almost like static, but there was definitely something there. In the split second before it vanished, you could almost make out human features, but they were wrong a Euro, too elongated, too hollow. Robert became convinced that something was visiting him once a year, always on the same date, always at the exact same time. He began keeping a weapon by his bed. He posted about his experiences online, creating a detailed log on paranormal forums. Other people started coming forward, saying they'd experienced something similar in the same neighborhood. A teenager named Marcus lived 2 streets over. He reported waking at 3:47 a.m. and seeing a tall figure standing at the foot of his bed. He screamed. His parents ran in, but there was nothing there. The worst part? His security camera showed the same distorted figure in his room. When they checked the footage, frame by frame, they could see this thing moving toward Marcus's bed at impossible speeds a Euro. The video stuttered and glitched whenever it got close. An elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson described the visitor differently. She said it stood outside her window every October 23rd at 3:47 a.m. staring in at her. She could see its outline pressed against the glass, and no matter how many times she blinked or looked away and back, it was still there, waiting. When her husband looked out the window, he saw nothing, but Mrs. Patterson insisted it was there, watching her specifically. The police investigated, of course. They found no evidence of break-ins, no signs of forced entry anywhere in the neighborhood. Forensic teams swept Robert's house multiple times. Nothing. The cameras were examined by tech experts who confirmed the footage was genuine a Euro, not edited or tampered with a Euro, but they couldn't explain the distortion or what was causing it. Then came the year that changed everything. October 23rd arrived again, and residents of the neighborhood prepared themselves. Some left their homes entirely, staying with relatives. Others armed themselves. Robert sat in his living room with every light on, waiting. At 3:46 a.m., all the lights in the neighborhood went out simultaneously. Not a gradual blackout a Euro. They all died at once. Street lights, porch lights, house lights. Complete darkness. In that darkness, residents heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, echoing through the streets, entering homes, moving through hallways. When the power returned 12 minutes later, 3 people were found unconscious in their homes. Robert Chen, Marcus the teenager, and Mrs. Patterson. They were rushed to the hospital. The doctors found nothing wrong with them physically, but they wouldn't wake up. For 3 weeks, they remained in comas, unresponsive to any stimuli. When Robert finally woke up, he was changed. He was pale, traumatized, and completely unresponsive when asked about what happened. The only thing he would say over and over was, "It wasn't visiting, it was choosing." Marcus and Mrs. Patterson woke up a few days later, but exhibited the same behavior, traumatized, silent, repeating, fragmented sentences that made no sense. Robert checked himself out of the hospital against medical advice and disappeared. His house was abandoned, his journal left behind on the kitchen table. But here's the really disturbing part. The following October 23rd, new residents of the neighborhood reported the same phenomena, and the year after that, the midnight visitor didn't stop. If anything, it seemed to be expanding. Now, similar reports come from towns across Ohio, then neighboring states. Always the same date, always 3:47 a.m., always the same distorted figure. Online communities dedicated to the phenomenon have grown exponentially. People post their experiences, compare timestamps, share security footage. The consistent details are undeniable. A tall, thin figure, the precise time, the way cameras malfunction around it, the sense of being chosen or observed. Some people have moved away from affected neighborhoods. Others have created websites tracking locations where the midnight visitor appears. Paranormal investigative teams have descended on these areas during late October, hoping to capture evidence. What's particularly unsettling is a theory that's emerged among researchers. The figure isn't randomly visiting homes. It's searching for something or someone. And once it finds what it's looking for, it takes them a euro. Not physically, but mentally, spiritually. Those who've encountered it directly go catatonic, and when they wake, they're no longer entirely themselves. Robert Chen's current location is unknown. His family reported him missing in 2015. Security footage from a gas station near his house, dated October 23rd, shows him standing motionless in front of the store for exactly 12 minutes before walking away into the darkness. The phenomenon continues. Every October 23rd, at 3:47 a.m., people across the Midwest report the same thing. A figure in their hallway, standing at their window, or watching from the shadows. The only difference is that you can't actually see it until the cameras catch a Tairo, and by then it's already chosen you. If you live in an affected area, locals will warn you. Lock your doors, keep your lights on, and stay awake on October 23rd. But they'll also tell you something more terrifying. Once the midnight visitor has noticed you, locking your doors won't matter. It's already inside your home in ways that doors and walls can't keep out. To this day, the phenomenon remains unexplained. Authorities have no official statement. Scientists have no explanation. All that remains is the pattern. October 23rd, 3:47 a.m., and the silhouette of something that should not be.
Some rides you don't survive.
Highway 61 stretches for over 600 miles through Minnesota and Missouri, connecting small towns and cutting through isolated stretches of woodland. Truckers and long-distance travelers know it well, but what many don't know is that there's a legend that circulates among regular drivers, one that most dismiss as urban myth until they encounter it themselves. It's called the Smiling Driver Euro, the story of a black sedan that appears on the highway during late-night drives, and the driver never blinks. The legend supposedly started in the late 1990 seconds, when a trucker named David Hartley reported seeing an unusual car driving alongside him for nearly 50 miles on Highway 61 near the Minnesota border. According to his account, given to state police, the car would match his speed exactly. When he'd slow down, it slowed down. When he'd accelerate, it accelerated. And all the while, the driver of the Sadnai Euro, visible in the side window a Euro, was staring at him with an impossibly wide smile. David said he tried to speed away, eventually reaching 95 miles per hour on a straight stretch of highway. The sedan kept pace. He tried to brake suddenly and let it pass, but the sedan braked with him. It was like it was choreographing every movement he made. Most disturbing was that he never once saw the driver blink. The smile remained fixed, and the eyes never closed. After 51 miles, David took an exit and pulled into a rest stop. He sat there for 20 minutes, shaking, checking his mirrors. The sedan never appeared. David filed a report with state police, but admitted it sounded insane. He was probably exhausted, they suggested. He'd been driving too long. For years, that was the only report. But then, in 2004, another driver named Sarah Klein experienced something similar. She was driving from Street, Paul to Kansas City when, around midnight, a black sedan appeared beside her. She saw the driver clearly in the moonlight a Euro, a man with pale skin wearing a dark suit and smiling so widely she could see all his teeth. His eyes were locked on her. Unlike David, Sarah immediately tried to lose the sedan. She pulled into the passing lane, accelerated, changed lanes repeatedly. The car always managed to stay alongside her. She described the driver as perfectly still despite the aggressive driving. No tension in his jaw, no grip on the wheel a Euro, just that smile. His mouth looked unnatural, stretched too wide, like someone had cut his face. Sarah eventually saw an approaching truck in the distance and raced toward it. She honked her horn desperately. The truck driver, confused by her erratic driving, flashed his lights. When Sarah checked her mirror, the black sedan was gone. She pulled over immediately, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't grip the steering wheel. She called 911 and reported everything to the police. Again, officers took her statement but found nothing. No black sedan matching her description was reported in the area. No accidents, no suspicious vehicles. But Sarah's report was different to Euro. She created a website documenting her experience and posted it online. Other people started responding. They had stories too. A salesman from Duluth had seen the sedan. A college student driving home for Thanksgiving had seen it. A nurse working night shifts had seen it. And every single account was consistent. The black sedan, the pale driver, the impossible smile, the unblinking stare. The stories gained traction in paranormal communities online. People started sharing techniques for what to do if you encountered the smiling driver. Some suggested speeding up, others suggested pulling off the road immediately. Some said you had to look directly at the driver and refuse to blink a Euro. If you broke eye contact or blinked, the driver would somehow pull you out of your car. Others claimed that if you counted backward from 100 without stopping, the driver would disappear. Of course, most of this was dismissed as nonsense, the kind of folklore that internet communities create around vague fears and highway anxiety. But then the reports started becoming more frequent and more detailed. In 2008, a highway patrol officer named Jim Turner reported witnessing something unusual. He was conducting a routine traffic stop when the driver he'd pulled over mentioned an encounter with a black sedan. Jim was skeptical until later that same night. While driving home, he saw it himself, a black sedan with tinted windows, matching his speed exactly, and when he looked over, he saw the driver's face. The smile was so wide it looked grotesque. The skin was waxy, almost translucent, and the eyes never blinked. Jim did something the other drivers hadn't done a Euro. He tried to pursue it. He hit his lights, accelerated, tried to pull over the vehicle. The sedan didn't speed up or try to escape. It simply vanished. Not gradual a Euro. It was there one moment, illuminated by his headlights, and the next, it was gone. Jim checked for exits nearby, but there were none. The car had simply disappeared into the night. Jim wrote a detailed report, something that had to be reviewed by his supervisor. His supervisor was skeptical, but concerned. Multiple credible people a Euro, a trucker, a nurse, a college student, and now a law enforcement officer a Euro, were reporting the same phenomenon. A decision was made to take the reports more seriously. Over the next few years, highway patrol officers across Minnesota and Missouri began documenting sightings. The data was striking. The appearances clustered around specific times, almost always between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. They almost always occurred on Highway 61 specifically, though a few reports came from parallel routes. The vehicle was always described identically, a black sedan, late 1992 model, impossible to identify further due to darkness or tinting. The driver was always the same, pale, smiling, impossibly wide, never blinking. What was truly disturbing was that several drivers reported that after their encounter, they experienced severe anxiety, insomnia, and what psychologists called intrusive imagery or Euro. They couldn't stop visualizing that smile. Some developed phobias of driving. Others reported seeing the smile in their peripheral vision for weeks or months after their encounter, even when they knew nothing was there. A man named Thomas Wright decided to drive Highway 61 specifically to try to find the sedan. He documented his drive meticulously, recording video the entire time. At around 1 a.m., as he was passing through a particularly isolated stretch of highway, A black sedan appeared beside him. Thomas kept his camera steady and looked directly at the driver. What he recorded was disturbing. A face that seemed slightly off-center, like a mask that wasn't fitted quite right. The smile was impossibly wide, the skin unnaturally pale, and when the driver's lips parted even wider a euro, almost like the face was splitting a euro. Thomas could see only darkness inside the mouth. No tongue, no teeth, no throat a euro, just darkness. Thomas nearly drove off the road in shock. When he looked back, the sedan was gone. His video, which he posted online, went viral. It had been viewed millions of times before he took it down, claiming he was receiving death threats from people who thought he'd faked it, or worse, people who said they recognized the driver. In 2015, a woman named Emma Chen reported an encounter with a twist. She said that when the sedan appeared beside her, the window rolled down, and the driver spoke. She couldn't make out the words a euro. They sounded like they were being played backward or in a language that didn't exist. But she understood the feeling they conveyed, an invitation. The driver was inviting her somewhere, and the invitation felt urgent, almost compulsory. Emma managed to exit the highway at the next ramp. She pulled into a rural gas station and called for help. When state police arrived, she was in severe distress. She was admitted to a psychiatric hospital, where she spent 3 months undergoing treatment for acute anxiety and what doctors described as a break from reality. When she was discharged, she refused to drive on any highway. She'd moved to an urban area and now takes public transportation exclusively. The strangest case came in 2019 when a driver named Marcus didn't report an encounter euro. His family did. Marcus had been driving home from a late shift when he encountered the sedan. His family never heard from him again. His car was found 3 days later, parked perfectly in a rest stop on Highway 61, doors locked, engine off, and completely empty. No signs of struggle, no blood, no indication of foul play. Marcus had simply vanished. Police investigated extensively. They found no leads. Marcus's case remains open. His family released a statement asking if anyone had seen him or his vehicle that night. They received hundreds of responses, many from people describing the black sedan and its driver. The authorities' stance on the smiling driver has evolved over the years. While they don't officially acknowledge the phenomenon a euro, no official police bulletin has ever been issued a euro. Individual officers have quietly warned drivers about staying alert on Highway 61 during late-night drives. Some rest stops have posted informal notices suggesting drivers travel in pairs and remain vigilant. The paranormal communities online have created elaborate theories about what the smiling driver might be. Some believe it's a ghost of a serial killer from the 1970 seconds who died on Highway 61. Others think it's something non-human, a being that feeds on fear or fascination. There are those who suggest it's a collective hallucination, a shared delusion created by the power of suggestion and the isolation of late-night highway driving. But the consistent reports, the physical evidence caught on video, and the documented disappearance of at least one person suggests something more sinister is occurring. Whatever the explanation, one fact remains. People continue to report encounters with the black sedan and its driver on Highway 61. If you find yourself driving that stretch of highway late at night and you see a black sedan pulling alongside you, don't look. Keep your eyes on the road, accelerate or decelerate abruptly, and exit at the nearest ramp. Because if the driver of that sedan smiles at you with that impossible smile, and you make eye contact, the one thing everyone agrees on is this: you'll never quite be the same again. Some even say you'll start seeing that smile in mirrors, in crowds, in your dreams, and eventually you might find yourself behind the wheel of that black sedan yourself, forever driving alongside other travelers, wearing that smile, never blinking, forever extending an invitation to go somewhere no one should go.